I'm joined once again by Navy veteran and Xingle Company founder and CEO, Patrick Reveron. Patrick, how are you?
Good, Jason. Thanks for having me. You've been quite the celebrity these days, so had to dress up a little bit for our superstar over here. So,
You're looking.
congratulations
Thank
on
you.
the redacted appearance. That was awesome. Watch the whole
Oh,
thing. That was cool.
thank you. Yeah, that was yesterday. I do have to thank Clayton and Natalie for having me on, and you're looking very sharp there, Patrick. So if anybody missed that appearance on Redacted, you can get it on X. I'm on there at JG underscore CSTT. I've been tweeting and Xing so much stuff. I don't know. People scroll down, they'll see it on there. It's also important for viewers to remember that they can follow Patrick and keep abreast of the latest happenings with the Xingle Company by following him on X at SingleTM, or you can also visit Xingle.io. And remember, Xingle is spelled with an X. Patrick, I'm quite pleased, I have to say. You've selected a really intriguing topic today, and it's honestly, I have to tell you, a lot of people don't really know anything about the Weather Underground, and certainly people who weren't alive in the 1960s, I would say barely anybody knows anything about it. Why don't you tell us how you first heard about them and give us a little background on what we're going to be talking about today? People are going to be able to join us for the sponsor exclusive part of the show by subscribing to you on substack.com/at Xingle Company, or of course any of the Crowdsource the Truth subscription platforms. And thanks to everyone who is sponsoring the show on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, subscribestar.com, patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, and anyone who subscribes to me on X. What do we got coming up later today, Patrick?
The first time I ever heard about the Weather Underground, it was the 2000 November 2007 when Barack Obama was about to get elected. And I would spend a lot of time with my grandfather in the car, and he would be listening to Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, the typical AM talk radio, conservative talk radio. Um, they would always talk about, Barack Obama's connections to, far left terrorists. And, my grandfather would always repeat this trope that the current Democrats are Marxists. They're not the Democrats of the Kennedy era. And, you know, it made me kind of political from a young age, but I didn't really grasp what he was saying until the last few years when we're really seeing, this left-wing accelerationism being perpetuated by the Democrat Party and how far left that they've been going, especially in the last 4 years.
It's interesting. I like the fact that you just used that term accelerationism. I first heard about that from, BX on Twitter, on X. She was introduced to me by Ken Silva. And I mean, is your grandfather still alive, Patrick? I get the sense by the way you're talking about him that he's maybe not.
No, he is.
Ah,
Yeah, sharp as a tack, 85
wow.
years old, Marine Corps Special Forces veteran,
Wow.
served in Vietnam, served in Korea. I'm pretty
Wow.
sure he was at the Bay of Pigs. Yeah, he
Holy
was.
cow. We
Yeah,
got to
he
get him on the
was.
show, man.
I know. I tried submitting him to Lex Friedman.
Hmm.
So yeah, he's got some amazing stories.
But what he
I see
said
that
to you
you.
about today's
Oh,
Democrats
sorry. Go ahead.
not being like the Kennedy Democrats, people can see you've got there in your office, you've got this famous headline framed. So your grandfather seems to be a very intelligent and insightful guy, and he's got a ton of real world experience. Please continue. Tell us more about what he was saying about all this.
Yeah, so I mean, I was getting I guess from an early age, I was getting a PhD level education about uh, what far left politics was. He would talk about Mao Zedong, the Cultural Revolution. He would talk about Marxism and, the Communist Manifesto and, how that's Das Kapital and written by Engels and Marx. He would talk about Stalin and Lenin and the Soviet Union and Communist Cuba. And in particular, like really this the hippie movement, because when he came home from Vietnam in '68, when he got out, um, he was getting spit on. He had guns pulled on him. He had was threatened with knives on the subways in New York. When he was in San Diego, he was threatened. So, um, for him to go through 8 years of, especially of special forces service during the most violent time in modern American military history, definitely gives him unique insight as to what these people think and, how deranged these leftists really can be. Um, and yeah, so that went on until I left for the military and still continues to this day. He's still teaching me things every day, every time I talk to him. So.
Yeah, he must be proud of you. That's a really good story. It's interesting you're talking about all the hippies, spitting on veterans when they returned. I had the opportunity to meet this guy, Robert Kiyosaki, one time at the Red Pill Expo. He wrote that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he's a super duper millionaire. He told some kind of story about how he got into buying gold in Vietnam or something like that. And I didn't know that much about his background before I saw him present on stage at this one particular conference. And I asked him about the Weather Underground, and he had never heard of it. I was quite surprised by that.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's what we're going to get into. I guess going back to my grandfather, he would always talk about Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn and how they were Obama's mentors. And the election was definitely the pretext for those lessons. Um, and then I started doing the research. I started looking into it, and he wasn't wrong. And at that time, I don't think he was using the internet, but the Weather Underground, they were this far left terrorist group, because that's what they were. Nixon declared them a domestic terrorist group. Um, and it was formed by all these graduates from Princeton, Columbia, Harvard, in 1969. Um, and it was started by, like I said, all these Ivy League grads, they were disaffected, disillusioned. They never went to serve in the war. And they all came from middle class families or very wealthy families, and they were all white. They started off as what were called the Weathermen, which today they would probably call it the Weather People, because you can't assign
The
the
weather
group a
they them.
gender, the weather they thems. Um, but so it grew out of a factional split inside the Students for Democratic Society, which was basically a far left, disorganized Turning Point USA in the mid 60s. It was prominent in campuses like Berkeley, which is notorious for its far left antics, Stanford, um, Kent State University, the famous shooting where the National Guard, shoot flowers, not bullets, that whole thing. Um, NYU, all these different universities, very prestigious, Harvard, Princeton, um, they had, the Students for Democratic Society factions organizing at these rallies at the universities. They started off protesting the Vietnam War. Then they would protest Lyndon Baines Johnson, and then subsequently Richard Nixon. But their main focus was, Richard Nixon and McCarthy and all of these quote unquote far right American politicians that they deemed as a threat to civil society. Um, so they would push and push and push. They were very confrontational. So they would have this slogan, and it would say, "Bring the war home." And They didn't say bring our troops home. They would chant bring the war home, and they would actively try to fight police and military and actually cause violence and mayhem. Um, they have manifestos. Um, I mean, it goes on. It perpetuated for about 7 years until they went underground. So when Nixon deemed them a domestic terrorist organization, they went from the Weathermen to the Weather Underground because they, proverbially went underground off the radar. Um, but that all started, I mean, 68, 69, and they didn't even reach their peak yet. Um, so in June of 1969, the manifesto, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows," was their magnum opus, if you will. It was in this magazine called New Left Notes. The Weather Underground leaders like Bernardine Dorn, Bill Ayers, who we'll talk about, Jeff Jones, Mark Rudd, John Jacobs, Terry Robbins, are all credited as co-authors on this manifesto. Um, and then October 8th through the 11th, they had this violent interaction called the Days of Rage, is what they called it. Now, Days of Rage is a very, I guess, similar phrase that we hear today when, the far left feminists or Code Pink, um, or Antifa or Trantifa
Well, let
or
me
the
stop you there
anti.
for a second,
Yes.
because
So,
everything that you're saying, it sounds very reminiscent of what we've been hearing with
yeah.
fighting the police and, bringing the war home, domestic terrorism, marching in the streets. Haven't they really just substituted Antifa and previously BLM? We haven't heard too much from BLM lately, but it seemed like they always ran in packs. The Weather Underground had some kind of loose affiliation with the Black Panthers and other militant black organizations at the time, and they were all just doing chaos, kind of similar to what we're seeing today. We've also got the Democratic Socialists for America, who, AOC is one of them, Zoran Mamdani. Isn't it the same, like a kind of a reincarnation, isn't it, Patrick?
Yeah, and that's why I call this far left movement that's sweeping America. I call it Weather Underground 2.0, because now they've injected themselves into the mainstream by them being able to go underground in the 70s. Bill Ayers, he was a professor at University of Chicago, where he mentored Barack Obama. Bernadine Dorn, she went on into private education. She would tutor kids, do all these things. And these are the people that started the infiltration of our universities. That's why all of our universities are these far left lunatic think tanks. And actually, it's funny that you bring up the Black Panther. We'll talk about them, but the leader, and a lot of people might know this name, Fred Hampton. Um, Fred Hampton, who they tried to get out of prison last year, I believe. They said he was wrongfully convicted. It was this whole thing. I don't know if that was 2 years or a year ago. They had the benefit concert for Fred Hampton. But anyways, he was the leader of the Black Panther Party, one of the generals, if you will. And he denounced the Weather Underground because they were harassing Fred Hampton to get access and to align with the Black Panther Party, the cause, as they called it. And Fred Hampton went on camera and denounced their actions, especially the Days of Rage. He he didn't say it verbatim, but he basically made the claim that these guys were either undercover intelligence assets or
Yeah,
federal agents,
there you go.
um, or that they were just, these privileged lunatics who were so disillusioned with their privileged lives and education that they hated themselves and they were full of self-hatred for being middle class, for being Ivy League, for being white.
Let's explore that for a second, because famously, when Bill Ayers was acquitted at trial, he, on the steps of the courthouse, he said, "Guilty as sin, but free as a bird." And it was interesting. I think that he was let out basically on a sort of a technicality with the evidence, where they had illegally obtained a phone call recording or something like that. And I don't know very much about the details of Fred Hampton or his allegations, but I tend to agree. There's a lot about Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers and the whole Weather Underground that does seem like it would be some sort of FBI cutout. Because also, we, in the subsequent years, people who were in prison, Susan Rosenberg was pardoned. We've got Chesa Boudin's father. His sentence was commuted and he was let out of jail, or maybe her sentence was commuted. But these people have come out of jail and now they're running these nonprofits that are funneling money. It just seems like somebody wants to agitate chaos and to polarize two sides, whether it's black versus white. I think there might be something to what Fred Hampton was saying.
I completely agree. And when I lived in Seattle, I was there in 2019, 2020, and 2021, but I was there for the entire George Floyd riots that swept Seattle. I was there for the beginning of COVID. I was there for Chaz, the sovereign city that they set up in the Capitol Hill district of Seattle. And they had this 10,000 person BLM march where half of them, were these crazy liberals, white women or white men, just, not black, participating in these BLM marches. But the strangest thing to me is the segregation that I saw at Chaz, where these BLM organizers, march leaders in Seattle, would not allow anybody that was white into their camp at Chaz. They wouldn't let them within even 10 feet. So it's, I always say that history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And I think that's what we're seeing today because, um, that's what the Black Panther Party tried to get away from is these far left white Marxists who are trying to basically hijack these movements in the name of violence. I mean, the Black Panthers definitely, I mean, they have a long history of violence. However, they were doing it their way, whereas Weather Underground was a lot more confrontational and a lot more arrogant, with a lot less power to do so and a lot less cojones. Um,
But Patrick,
but
isn't it
I
also interesting that Fred Hampton is in jail and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn are celebrated as, left-wing icons? As you said, Bill Ayers was a professor. Bernardine Dorn was also, I think, a professor. We used to
yes,
speak a lot with David
yeah, she
Hawkins.
was. So that's the crazy thing about Bernadine Dorn is that she was on the FBI's most wanted list, the top 10 in 1970. And later she becomes a tenured professor of clinical law at Northwestern, which, if for those of you who don't know, Northwestern is one of the most prestigious law schools in the world, in Evanston, Illinois. And then Bill Ayers became a law professor, or not yeah, I think it was prosecutional law, um, and I think it was political science at University of Illinois, Chicago, um, which it seems to be a very central location for this modern, Marxist Bolshevism movement, whether it be figures like Obama or J.B. Pritzker. All of these far left um, icons, if you will, have all infiltrated the universities for the last 50 years and then have been breeding these far left politicians, indoctrinating them in the universities and then putting them out into Chicago ward politics to go be an alderman and subsequently president of the United States.
It's pretty crazy. I don't know if you were aware of this. I guess this is an elective, but in 2005 and 6, Bernardine Dorn gave a lecture called Torture Paradigms and Practice. I mean, that seems like an odd subject, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I mean, obviously, I wasn't inside those classrooms, but um, I've had professors that have said some pretty crazy things. So I wouldn't, it wouldn't be beyond the pale that somebody like Bernardine Dorn, who is a far left terrorist, became a law professor at Northwestern, is telling her students some pretty insane things. And I tried to find anybody who studied under her, but um, can't find anybody because they're probably all working in politics.
Yeah, they're not going to tell you. You know, there's something
Yeah.
else interesting that I wanted to share with you that I think perhaps lends credibility to this notion that they might have been planted by the FBI or somehow, I don't know, whatever it is that Fred Hampton is alleging. This is an article that appeared. Can you see the date here of this New York Times article? Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, so the New York Times is printed at like 4 o'clock in the morning or something because you get it, on your way to work. And the title of this article is No Regrets for a Love of Explosives. In a memoir of sorts, a war protester talks of a lifetime with the Weatherman. And Bill Ayers says, I don't regret setting bombs. I feel we didn't do enough. He spent the 1970s as a fugitive in the Weather Underground. And of course, obviously, you're quite knowledgeable about this, Patrick, but you're going to know that they bombed the Capitol building, the Pentagon, banks, basically the same targets as 9/11. Isn't that true?
Yeah,
World Trade
precisely.
Center.
Yeah. Yeah, and police stations like we see Antifa
Right,
doing.
right.
Um,
But
you know,
specifically on this 9/11 article, had you seen that detail before? What do you think about how that connects the Weather Underground to more modern domestic terrorism?
um, I did not even know that that article existed.
You should share
And I
that with your
don't,
grandfather, and we should have him on for a
yeah.
future episode.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't believe in coincidences. So the fact that the New York Times, Project Mockingbird Node, Project Monarch Node published this on September 11th, 2001 about far left terrorism and explosives is not a coincidence to me. So,
I agree. There's something else I want to share with you about that because it ties now really to current politics. There was an article, Willie Brown got a low key warning. You remember Willie Brown, right?
yeah, yeah.
He was the mayor, I think, of San Francisco. This is SF Gate, which is, I don't know. Oh, it says this is not a paywall. What is it?
Oh, they want
Didn't
your
used to have
data.
this. Didn't used to have that. Let's see if we can get this article. It wants me to pay something. Here, you got a low-key warning about air travel. This is September 12th this comes out. And this article tells us that Mayor Willie Brown, somebody told him, don't fly to New York. So, I mean, what the hell is that? This is, and by the way, this isn't some, much later, air quotes, conspiracy theory. This is the next day. Willie Brown is saying he got a low-key early warning about travel to New York.
Yeah, it's funny how a lot of people, Seth MacFarlane, creator of American Dad and Family Guy, he got a warning or a mix-up of some sorts not to fly to New York from I think it was Boston or something. He was supposed to fly from Boston to New York on September 11th. I think Mark Wahlberg, Michael Jackson, that's a famous one. Um, I think Donald Rumsfeld was supposed to fly.
I think Donald
Um,
Rumsfeld was probably involved in planning the whole thing. But just to stay on Willie
yeah.
Brown for 1 second, you remember who he famously brought into politics? This ignorant hooker
Absolutely.
who almost became the president.
And I've written extensively about California's communism problem, breeding politicians like Gavin Newsom, like Kamala Harris. Um, and one of the Weather Underground pioneers, David Gilbert, he had a son with other pioneer Kathy Boudin, and their son Chesa Boudin was elected as the San Francisco District Attorney in 2019, subsequently recalled. And that's my whole point is that it has spread. So it's not just exclusive to, Chicago dirty ward politics anymore. This is rife in San Francisco, in Los Angeles. Um, And we've seen it with George Gascon, the corrupt DA in LA. Um, all of these far left DAs are and mayors and vice presidents and presidential candidates, presidents, um, seem to be churned out like some sort of factory, and now it's happening in New York. Um,
Yeah.
you have a
Let
Maoist
me pause
activist.
you
Oh,
here for a second because we've got a lot more to discuss, but we're going to make our way over to the sponsor exclusive part of the show. I hope people will join us. You can see that right now by going to substack.com/@Xingle Company. Sponsor Patrick, subscribe on there. Also, if you're subscribed to Crowdsource the Truth on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com or subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Or if you're following me on X at JG_CSTT and you subscribe, you'll be able to join us for the sponsor exclusive segment